everyone, look at her. The useless ex-wife. She never belonged here.
Sierra Caldwell's voice cut through the ballroom, sharp and mocking. Her eyes locked on Nia Ellison. The woman Malik Sterling threw away, Sierra said. The useless ex-wife. She never belonged here. Her laugh carried across the chandeliers, mixing with the whispers of the guests. And now she shows up at my wedding? For what? To embarrass herself again. The crowd murmured. Some smirked, others just watched. Then the double doors opened. The music stopped. The hall went silent. Every eye turned to the entrance. The chandeliers glowed above. The red carpet stretched down the aisle, lined with roses and orchids. At the altar, Malik Sterling adjusted the cuff of his white tuxedo. He looked calm, but his jaw tightened. His best man whispered, "You ready, Malik?" Malik nodded, though his eyes were restless. Then the whispers shifted. Guests turned toward the doors. The strings faltered. A woman walked in, Nia Ellison. And with her came 3 children, their faces a perfect reflection of the groom's. The room froze. Silence filled the wedding. At billionaire Malik Sterling's wedding, his ex-wife, Nia Ellison, walked in with 3 children. The room went silent. What should have been a celebration became something else. Whispers spread fast. Who were the kids? Why did they look so much like the groom? What happened next turned one of the city's biggest weddings into a courtroom battle. Behind the flowers, music, and flashing cameras, the truth was about to come out. Sierra Caldwell's bridal suite looked like something out of a magazine. The walls were draped in ivory silk, fresh roses filled every vase, and a bottle of champagne sat unopened on the vanity. But Sierra wasn't admiring the decor. She stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at herself in the gown she had dreamed about for years. Her lips curved in satisfaction, but her eyes carried something colder. "Seat her in front," Sierra said without turning around. The wedding planner glanced up from a clipboard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Sierra replied. Her tone left no room for misinterpretation. "Nia Ellison sits in the front row. Center aisle. I want everyone to see her." The planner hesitated. Most ex-wives usually they're placed toward the back. Sierra finally turned from the mirror. Her expression was sharp, her patience thin. "I'm not asking for tradition. I'm telling you what to do. Nia will sit in front, where she belongs, on display." Her bridesmaids, perched on the sofa with their champagne flutes, exchanged silent glances. They had seen Sierra like this before. When her voice dropped low and steady, resistance was pointless. "Of course," the planner muttered, quickly jotting it down before leaving the room. Sierra smirked at her reflection. This was her wedding day, but it wasn't just about her and Malik. It was about control. About making sure the entire city saw her victory. Downstairs, the Sterling Hotel ballroom hummed with life. The chandeliers blazed, casting gold light over the crowd. Round tables dressed in silk held centerpieces of orchids and roses that seemed to glow under the lights. Waiters moved smoothly between guests, balancing trays of champagne and canapes. A string quartet played at the far corner, the notes weaving through the air. The atmosphere wasn't only festive, it was calculated. Every detail had been designed to impress. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a stage. The guest list proved it. CEOs of major companies sat at one table, their spouses glittering in diamonds. A few politicians occupied another, already leaning close to one another, whispering about business disguised as small talk. Celebrities mingled freely, pretending not to notice how many eyes were on them. Even socialites who had no real connection to the Sterlings made sure they were there, because being absent would mean missing the city's most important event of the season. This was the kind of room where whispers mattered more than speeches, where appearances were currency, where the wrong look could cost someone a reputation. And at the center of it all stood Malik Sterling. At the altar, Malik cut the image of control. His white tuxedo was tailored to perfection. His cufflinks gleamed under the lights. His shoes reflected the polished marble of the floor. Every move was calm, deliberate. To most people watching, he looked untouchable. but if you looked closely, you could see the cracks. The way his jaw tensed just slightly. The way his hand shifted against his side, as though searching for something steady. His best man leaned in, whispering, "You good?" "I'm fine," Malik said. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed something else. A storm behind the surface. The guests noticed too. Not all of them, but enough. A few exchanged glances, wondering why the groom seemed distracted. Others brushed it off, chalking it up to nerves. After all, even billionaires weren't immune to the weight of wedding vows. Across the room, Sierra was already working her other plan. Her phone buzzed against the table in her bridal suite. She unlocked it quickly, scanning a flood of messages. The group chat with her closest confidants, women she trusted to carry every rumor, was alive with updates. "She's here. You should see her dress. Outdated. She looks like she's trying too hard. Don't worry, we'll get everything on camera." Sierra's lips curved into a tight smile. She typed her response carefully. "Good. Make sure you capture her face. Every look, every reaction. I want it all." Her bridesmaids chuckled softly, shaking their heads. They knew exactly what Sierra was doing, but none of them dared to say it out loud. For Sierra, this wasn't just about marrying Malik. This was about winning. About making sure that Nia Ellison's presence, the ex-wife everyone still whispered about, became nothing more than fuel for gossip. While the orchestra played and the guests mingled, Sierra's mind wasn't on vows or promises. It was on the moment those grand double doors would open, on the hush that would fall across the ballroom, on the stares, the whispers, the phones held low to capture what would unfold. The trap was set. But what Sierra hadn't considered, what not a single guest in that room could have predicted, was that Nia Ellison wasn't walking into humiliation. She was walking into the spotlight with 3 children whose very faces threatened to shatter Malik Sterling's perfect image. And when those doors opened, the whispers would not go the way Sierra expected. The ballroom sparkled, but Malik's mind began to drift. The sight of Nia in the front row brought back memories he thought he had buried. It started with whispers. Sierra had been the one to plant them, carefully and deliberately. "Are you sure you can trust her?" she had asked one night over dinner, her voice low, as though she was protecting him. "She's always with Julian. Always." Dr. Julian Cross. A longtime family friend. A man Malik had once trusted enough to call brother. Julian had been there when Malik broke his arm as a teenager, had written prescriptions for Malik's mother when she was ill, had attended family cookouts without ever overstaying his welcome. To Malik, Julian had always been reliable, steady. But Sierra had a way of twisting things. One afternoon, Malik received a text from Sierra. Attached was a photo. Nia and Julian standing close outside a cafe. Julian's hand rested lightly on Nia's shoulder. Cropped tightly, the photo made it look like more than a friendly gesture. "She told me she was home that day," Sierra whispered when Malik confronted her with the photo. Her voice carried just enough sadness to sound convincing. "Why lie, Malik? Why keep secrets?" The truth was simpler than the picture suggested. Nia had been at the cafe to discuss a charity project Julian had offered to sponsor. They had been going over logistics, nothing more. But the way Sierra framed it made it sound like betrayal. More photos followed. Grainy shots of Nia and Julian leaving the hospital together, where Nia had gone for a checkup. A blurred image of them in a car, talking. None of them proved anything, but together they painted a story Sierra wanted Malik to believe. And Malik, raised in a world where reputation mattered more than reason, didn't ask enough questions. When Nia tried to explain, he barely listened. "Malik, you know me," she said one night, her voice cracking. "Julian is a friend. That's all. Please. You have to trust me." But Malik's jaw was set, his arms crossed. "Trust?" he asked. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? Do you know what this does to my name?" "It's not true," Nia cried. "Why won't you believe me?" Her pleas bounced against a wall of silence. Malik wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking past her, at the image Sierra had painted in his mind, an image that matched the rumors better than it matched his wife. The arguments grew sharper, colder. Nights once filled with laughter turned into silence or accusations. "You're embarrassing me," Malik said once, his voice low but firm. "If you cared about this marriage, you'd think about what your actions look like." That was the difference between them. For Nia, marriage was about love, trust, and shared struggles. For Malik, it was about image, legacy, and how the world judged him. And Sierra knew exactly how to use that weakness. By the time Malik signed the divorce papers, he told himself it was necessary, that he couldn't risk a scandal, that maybe Nia hadn't cheated, but the perception was enough to destroy them. But standing in the ballroom now, watching Nia with 3 children at her side, Malik felt something twist inside him. The certainty he once clung to no longer felt steady. Sierra's trap had worked years ago, but tonight, the past was walking back into the room, and the lies were no longer safe in the dark. Outside the Sterling Hotel, a line of luxury cars stretched across the drive. Engines purred, cameras flashed, and valets rushed to open doors for arriving guests. But then the crowd shifted. A new car pulled up, slow and deliberate. A Bentley, black, polished, gleaming like glass under the evening lights. The door opened. First came the heels, silver, catching the light with each step. Then the gown, a shimmering fabric that seemed to move like water, cut perfectly to her frame. Nia Ellison stepped out. The crowd froze. Some guests standing at the entrance stopped mid-conversation. Even the photographers, trained to keep snapping, lowered their cameras for a split second before firing again. Nia didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her presence commanding without a single word. Then, behind her, 3 small figures appeared. Jalen, Jordan, and Jada, the triplets, each one holding hands, moving carefully down from the car. Their outfits matched, tailored, simple, and elegant for children, but it wasn't the clothes that silenced the crowd. It was their faces. The eyes, someone whispered. "Look at them," another muttered. The triplets had Malik Sterling's eyes. The same sharp gaze. The same bone structure in their cheeks. The resemblance was undeniable, so clear it didn't need pointing out. A ripple of murmurs spread across the entrance. Guests leaned toward each other, speaking behind hands, though their eyes never left the children. Phones appeared, low against hips, cameras recording what no one wanted to miss. The valet, realizing who he was holding the door for, stepped back quickly, almost bowing. Nia gave him a polite nod and started forward. Her heels clicked against the marble steps. Each step echoed, sharp and steady. The sound cut through the chatter, through the hum of violins spilling faintly from the ballroom doors.
Step, click, step, click.
Inside, the orchestra faltered. The violins wavered, the rhythm breaking as though the musicians too felt the weight of what was about to happen. By the time Nia and the children reached the ballroom entrance, the noise of the crowd had thinned into silence. Heads turned. The chandeliers glowed brighter, but the air felt heavier, thicker. Nia placed her hand on the door. 2 ushers, unsure of what to do, hesitated before pulling it open for her. And when they did, the entire room shifted. The grand doors swung wide. The music choked, faltering into nothing. Every eye in the room snapped to the entrance. First, Nia. Her gown caught the chandeliers above, scattering light as if she carried her own spotlight. Then the children, stepping just behind her, hand in hand, their small faces mirrors of the groom waiting at the altar. The crowd held its breath. Gasps, sharp and unhidden, broke out. "That's Malik's." One voice started before cutting off. "It can't be," another whispered. Phones lifted. A few guests forgot discretion altogether, openly recording as though the moment belonged to them. At the altar, Malik stiffened. His hand gripped the edge of the podium. His eyes widened, his face tight, caught between shock and something deeper, something harder to hide. Beside him, Sierra froze. Her smile faltered. Her perfect posture bent just slightly, shoulders tense. She hadn't planned for this. Not this. Nia walked forward slowly. Each step carried weight, each step a reminder that she had not come alone, and she had not come to be dismissed. And with every step, the wedding stopped being about vows and promises. It became about the truth walking into the room. The ballroom was silent, the air heavy with tension. Nia stood at the entrance, her gown catching the chandelier light. The triplets were just a step behind her, holding hands, steady despite the hundreds of eyes watching them. At the altar, Malik Sterling froze. He tried to stand taller, tried to keep his composure, but his eyes betrayed him. They flicked to the children and then away again, as though the truth burned too brightly to look at for long. Sierra was the first to break. Her heels clicked as she stepped forward, the train of her gown dragging against the marble. Her smile was gone, her face tight with fury. "What do you think you're doing here?" she snapped, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You dare walk into my wedding like this?" Nia didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her posture calm, her voice steady. "I'm not here for you, Sierra." The simplicity of the words cut deeper than any insult. The crowd stirred. Some guests leaned closer, whispering. Others simply watched, eyes wide, as if the wedding had transformed into a play they couldn't look away from. Sierra's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here? To humiliate me? To make a scene? To ruin the most important day of my life?" The triplets shifted behind Nia. Jalen squeezed his sister Jada's hand. Jordan stared straight ahead, his jaw set in quiet defiance. Nia finally looked at Sierra, her gaze unshaken. "I'm here for the truth." Gasps scattered across the room. Malik's best man leaned toward him. "Do something," he whispered urgently. But Malik couldn't move. His jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the edge of the podium. His eyes kept pulling back to the children. The resemblance was undeniable. His children's faces, his eyes, his expression, stared back at him from across the room. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. "They look just like him." "Are they?" "No, that can't be. Look at the girl, the same smile as Malik." The murmurs split the room. Some guests clutched their pearls, scandalized. Others smirked, entertained by the drama unfolding. A few frowned, uncomfortable with how quickly the ceremony had unraveled. Sierra raised her voice over the whispers. "This is pathetic, Nia. You couldn't move on, so you came here to drag me down. You think people will pity you." Nia's eyes didn't waver. "I don't need pity. I came here because lies don't stay buried forever." Sierra laughed bitterly, but the sound cracked. "Lies? The only liar here is you. You spent years sneaking around behind Malik's back." "That's enough," Malik cut in, his voice sharper than he intended. The room fell quiet again, eyes snapping to him. Sierra turned toward him, her face softening instantly. "Malik, don't let her do this. She's here to ruin us." But Malik's eyes weren't on Sierra. They were fixed on the children. He tried to steady his breathing, tried to convince himself this was a trick, but the truth was staring him down in triplicate. Jalen shifted under the weight of his gaze. Jada ducked her head slightly. Jordan held firm, his chin up, his expression eerily similar to Malik's when he was younger. The resemblance was crushing. Malik's throat tightened. He looked back at Nia, his voice low. "Why now?" Nia's answer was calm, simple. "Because the time for silence is over." The murmurs rose again, the crowd splitting into factions. Some whispered support for Sierra, dismissing Nia as desperate. Others leaned toward Nia, convinced by the undeniable resemblance. Cameras flashed quietly, despite the no-photo rule. The story had already left the room. Sierra's control cracked. She stepped closer to Nia, her voice rising. "You will not ruin this day. I built this wedding. I built this life. And you." Nia cut her off, her tone sharp but still calm. "I didn't come to ruin anything. But the truth doesn't wait for permission." The room froze again. Malik swallowed hard, caught between his fiancée's fury and his ex-wife's quiet certainty. He wanted to deny, to defend his dignity. But the longer he looked at those children, the weaker his certainty became. And the guests, the city's elite, were there to watch him choose. The ballroom felt less like a wedding and more like a courtroom. The silence had broken, replaced by murmurs that spread like fire from one table to the next. Every guest had an opinion, and none of them stayed quiet for long. At a corner table, an investor leaned toward his colleague, his voice low but firm. "If they're his, the Sterling legacy changes tonight. 3 heirs walking in out of nowhere? That shifts everything." His companion nodded, already thinking about board meetings, inheritance, and the balance of power. A few seats away, a well-dressed socialite fanned herself nervously. "Sierra wouldn't lie, right?" she whispered. Her friend didn't answer. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the triplets, biting her lip, silently doing the math in her head. Near the front, an elderly family friend straightened in his chair. He had known Malik's parents, had watched him grow up. Nia never raised her voice. He said to no one in particular, his tone heavy with conviction. "That tells me enough." His words carried weight, and a few heads nearby nodded in quiet agreement. Across the room, younger guests pulled out their phones despite the rules. Screens glowed as they typed furiously, sending updates to group chats, social media, anywhere that would spread the scandal faster than the Sterling hotel staff could contain it. The orchestra still hadn't resumed. The musicians sat frozen, bows in hand, as though afraid to play a note until they knew whose side history would remember them on. Whispers grew into louder conversations. Lines were being drawn in real time. Some sided with Sierra, convinced the children were a stunt, a desperate ploy by an ex-wife seeking revenge. Others saw the truth in the children's faces, in Malik's shaken expression, in Nia's steady calm. By the doors, hotel staff exchanged worried looks. They had worked enough events to know this one had slipped beyond anyone's control. The crowd wasn't united anymore. It was split down the middle, every guest waiting for Malik to speak. But he stayed silent, torn between protecting his image and acknowledging the truth standing just a few feet away. The tension in the room had shifted. Sierra no longer held the upper hand. The crowd was turning and everyone could feel it. While the ballroom stirred with whispers, Nia stood steady. The crowd only saw her calm surface, but behind that calm was a story no one there fully knew. She hadn't walked this path alone. It was late evening when Loretta Carter, Malik's mother, first saw the babies. She had slipped into Nia's modest apartment quietly, her driver waiting outside. The triplets were barely a few months old, bundled in soft blankets. Loretta sat on the edge of the couch, her hand trembling as she reached for Jalen's tiny fist. The boy's eyes opened, and she gasped. They were Malik's eyes, the same sharp, steady gaze she had seen in her son as a child. Tears welled in her eyes. "They'll never believe you," Loretta whispered. "Not now." Not with Sierra twisting everything. Nia's voice cracked. "So what do I do?" Loretta pressed her hand over Nia's. "You protect them, and I'll protect you. When the time comes, the truth will speak for itself." She kissed each baby's forehead before leaving that night. And though she couldn't risk open defiance against her son, she made sure Nia always had quiet support, a check slip through a trusted aide, a call to a doctor, a connection here and there to keep the children safe. When the world turned its back, Darius Freeman stepped in. A businessman with a reputation for spotting talent, he had been a friend of Nia's late father. Darius saw her pain, but also her determination. "You can let this break you," he told her one afternoon in his office, "or you can build something they can't touch." Nia sat across from him, her hands tired from juggling 3 infants and part-time jobs. "I don't know where to start." "You start here," Darius said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were outlines for a boutique fashion line, contacts for suppliers, and real estate investments structured in her name only. "I'll guide you, but the work will be yours. And when people come for you, this will shield your assets." Nia threw herself into it. Days blurred into nights as she sketched designs at the kitchen table, rocking a baby with one hand and writing notes with the other. Darius connected her with investors who respected her grit, not her last name. He didn't hand her an empire, he showed her how to build one. The work was relentless. While Sierra flaunted wealth and parties in magazines, Nia kept her head down. She opened a small boutique first, then expanded into property. Each success restored a piece of her dignity. There were nights she fell asleep on the couch with fabric samples spread across her lap and a laptop open to property listings. Mornings began before sunrise, packing school lunches for the triplets before rushing to meetings. She stumbled at times, but she never quit. Slowly, she went from the woman whispered about as the ex-wife who lost everything to a rising figure in her own right. By the time she walked into the Sterling Hotel that night, she wasn't just Malik's ex-wife. She was Nia Ellison, designer, investor, and mother to 3 children who carried a legacy bigger than Sierra could ever claim. As the guests whispered and Sierra fumed, Nia's calm presence came from more than pride. It came from knowing she had allies who had stood with her in silence, from knowing she had rebuilt her world piece by piece. Loretta's promise, Darius's mentorship, her own relentless fight. That was the alliance no one in the Sterling ballroom could see, the quiet strength that had carried her to this very moment. The tension in the ballroom was high, and Sierra Caldwell refused to lose control of it. Her fury had boiled over, but now she tried to turn it into power. She raised her hand, and one of her assistants hurried forward with a leather-bound folder. Sierra snatched it and flipped it open, her eyes sweeping the room. "Enough of this nonsense," she said, her voice sharp, carrying to every corner of the hall. "You want proof? I'll show you proof." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Sierra pulled out glossy photographs and held them high. Grainy, low-resolution shots of Nia and Julian outside cafes, near a car, walking through a hospital corridor. "Here she is," Sierra declared, her voice trembling with triumph. "Running around with Dr. Julian Cross while still married to Malik. Here's the so-called mother of his children. A liar. An adulteress." Whispers surged. Guests leaned forward, squinting at the photos as they passed between hands. To some, the images looked damning. To others, they looked oddly staged. Nia didn't move. She didn't need to. Julian Cross stepped forward instead. Calm, steady, the same man who had once been accused by rumor and innuendo. His voice was even, his tone unshaken. "I won't let this farce continue." He reached into his briefcase and laid out a stack of documents on the podium. "These are hospital records, signed by myself and corroborated by the attending staff. I was Nia's physician during her pregnancy. I monitored her health, her blood pressure, her stress levels. I was not her lover. I was her doctor." He opened one file, showing ultrasound images marked with dates and medical codes. "These records confirm not only the pregnancies, but my role in safeguarding them. Every visit, every test, every report." He held up one sheet for the crowd to see. "The dates align. The truth is here. These children were conceived during Nia's marriage to Malik. My role was medical, nothing more." The ballroom shifted again. The certainty Sierra had tried to whip up began to unravel. Guests who had leaned in close to examine her photographs now leaned back, eyes narrowing. The murmurs turned. "That explains it. She wasn't lying after all. Those photos, they're cropped. Look at the edges." Sierra's face flushed red. She slammed the photos back onto the podium. "He's covering for her. He's in love with her, always has been. Of course he'd make up stories." But before she could continue, Loretta Carter rose slowly from her seat in the front row. Malik's mother, the matriarch whose presence alone commanded silence. She gave a small nod to her aide, who rushed to the back of the hall. A projector flickered to life. The lights dimmed slightly. The chatter died. Everyone's eyes fixed on the screen as the first slide appeared. Across the wall, in bold letters, the words glowed. "DNA results. Sterling versus Ellison children." The room froze. The next slide appeared. 3 profiles. Jalen, Jordan, Jada. Each name lined with a percentage. Paternity probability, 99.9%. Father, Malik Sterling. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. People stood from their chairs. Hands flew to mouths. The murmurs weren't whispers anymore. They were exclamations. "It's true. He's the father." "Oh my God." Cameras clicked despite desperate attempts by staff to stop them. The story had escaped the room now. It was already being uploaded, shared, spread across the city. At the altar, Malik's face drained of color. He gripped the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted between the glowing results on the screen and the 3 children standing beside Nia. Jalen stared back at him, unblinking. Jordan lifted his chin, defiant. Jada clung to her mother's hand, her expression soft but certain. Sierra's composure shattered completely. "No," she shouted. "This is fake. She forged it. Loretta's voice cut her off, firm and calm. "These results were verified by my team. Independent labs. Multiple confirmations. The truth cannot be argued anymore." The hall erupted. Some guests cheered. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few simply sat in stunned silence, processing the scandal of the century unfolding before their eyes. And in the middle of it all, Malik Sterling, billionaire, groom, heir, stood exposed, stripped of the narrative he had clung to for years. The lie was over. The truth was undeniable. The projector screen went dark, but the weight of the DNA results still hung in the air. Guests whispered, eyes darting between Malik, Nia, and the triplets. The truth was undeniable. Sierra refused to surrender. She stepped forward, her voice sharp, cutting through the noise.
"Fine.
"So they're his. But tell me this, Nia." She turned, her eyes narrowing like blades. "If Malik is their father, where was he? Who tucked them in at night? Who held them when they cried? Who kept them fed when you were scraping by?" Her words landed heavy, slicing into the silence. She let them hang for a moment, then spat the final blow. "Not Malik.
No."
It was Julian. Always Julian. The crowd murmured louder now. A few nodded, unsure. Some frowned, unwilling to let Sierra's words distract them from the evidence. But Sierra's question struck where it hurt most. At the altar, Malik staggered under the weight of it. His hand pressed against the podium as though he needed it to stay upright. His lips parted, but no words came out. For once, the billionaire heir, so polished and controlled, looked like he didn't know what to say. Nia turned slightly, pulling Jalen, Jordan, and Jada closer. Her arms encircled them, shielding them from the storm around them. Her face was calm, but her eyes glistened. Her voice was steady, but it carried cracks of pain. "I kept them safe because you stopped listening." The room hushed. Nia's gaze moved to Malik, holding his eyes for the first time that night. "You chose your image over your family. You chose whispers over truth. I begged you to believe me, but you shut the door. So I did what I had to do. I raised them. I protected them. Without you." Gasps rippled again. A few guests lowered their heads, ashamed for having believed Sierra's lies. Others leaned closer, whispering, hungry for every word. Malik's throat worked as he tried to respond, but his voice caught. He couldn't deny her. The triplets standing by her side were proof enough. And for the first time in his life, Malik Sterling looked small. The man who once held the city's respect now stood stripped before it, his silence louder than any confession. The ballroom was still reeling from Sierra's accusations, from Nia's quiet defense, from Malik's silence. The guests waited for someone to speak, for the storm to either end or explode again. Then Malik's eyes shifted. Jalen had shifted nervously, pulling at his collar. As he moved, the edge of his hairline brushed back just enough for Malik to see it, a faint crescent-shaped mark, tucked just behind the boy's ear. Malik's chest tightened. Slowly, he stepped forward. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor. The crowd went quiet, following his gaze. "Wait," Malik whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He leaned down slightly, his hand trembling as he gently brushed Jalen's hair aside. There it was, clear, undeniable. A crescent birthmark. The Sterling birthmark. Malik staggered back a step, his eyes wide. "My father had it," he said, his voice breaking for the first time that evening. "I have it." The crowd stiffened. He turned to Jordan, who was gripping his brother's hand tightly. Malik crouched, his hands shaking as he looked behind Jordan's ear. The mark was there too. Small, faint, but the same shape. His lips parted. His eyes glistened. And he does too. A murmur swept the hall, soft at first, then rising, as more guests leaned forward to see, to whisper, to process what they were witnessing. Finally, Malik turned to Jada. She clung to Nia's side, her little shoulders tense under the weight of so many stares. Malik hesitated, then glanced at Nia. For a moment she didn't move. Then, with a slow nod, she bent down and brushed her daughter's curls back. There it was again. The third mark. Malik's breath caught. His voice cracked as he spoke, barely able to form the words. And she does too. The room was silent now. Utterly silent. Malik straightened, his hand pressed against his chest as if to steady his racing heart. His face, once a mask of control, then a wall of doubt, finally crumbled. His shoulders dropped. His jaw trembled. "They're mine," he said, his voice raw, carrying through the hall. "They've always been mine." Gasps swept the crowd, but this time there was no divide. The recognition was collective, undeniable. It wasn't just documents or DNA on a projector anymore. It was blood. It was lineage written on skin. A woman in the front row clutched her pearls. "The Sterling mark," she whispered. "It's true." An elder guest shook his head slowly. "No one can fake that." Even Sierra froze, her fury faltering as the final piece fell into place. Her words died before they could leave her lips. She had no rebuttal. Not to this. Malik turned back to the children. For the first time, he didn't look away. His eyes softened, wet with tears. His hand lifted slightly, as if reaching for them, then fell back to his side, heavy with shame. The crowd sat in stunned silence, every person in that ballroom knowing they had just witnessed the truth break through every lie. The silence in the ballroom didn't last long. It shifted, almost imperceptibly at first, into a wave of sound. A few guests began to clap, hesitant, testing the air. Then others joined, louder, steadier. Within seconds, the Sterling Hotel ballroom filled with applause. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't for the wedding. It was recognition. The truth had been seen, and the crowd was responding to it. Whispers became cheers. Guests leaned forward, nodding to one another, clapping harder as though affirming what they had just witnessed. "They're his," someone said proudly. "Finally, it's out." The sound rolled through the room until it was undeniable. Malik stood frozen at the altar, staring at the triplets. Nia held her hands tight, her face calm but her eyes brimming with years of pain and relief. The applause grew louder. And then, in the middle of it all, Sierra Caldwell stood alone. Her bouquet trembled in her hands, petals dropping one by one onto the marble floor. She turned her head, scanning the room desperately for an ally. The bridesmaids who had once echoed her laughter now sat with eyes lowered, avoiding her gaze. The socialites who had gossiped in her group chat scrolled through their phones, already rewriting the narrative. Even the businessmen and politicians who had smiled at her hours earlier leaned back in their chairs, lips pressed in disapproval. She had no one. Her face hardened. She clutched the bouquet tighter, as though the flowers could shield her from the humiliation pressing in from every angle. The applause wasn't for her. It never would be. Then, slowly, Loretta Carter rose from her seat. The room hushed again. All eyes turned to the Sterling matriarch. She stood tall, her presence commanding, her voice firm and unshaken. "Enough," Loretta said, her words cutting cleanly through the air. "Lies fall. Truth stands." Her gaze swept over the hall, first to Malik, then to Nia, then to the children. "The truth has always been in front of us. Tonight, it can no longer be denied." The applause erupted again, louder this time, unified. Some stood to their feet. A few wiped tears. The Sterling legacy, once clouded in whispers, had been reset before their eyes. Sierra's breath came in shallow bursts. Her grip on the bouquet slackened, petals spilling in a trail as her hands shook. Her eyes darted to Malik, pleading for him to say something, anything that would pull her back into the light. But Malik didn't move.
He didn't speak.
His eyes stayed on the children. That silence cut deeper than any word. Finally, Sierra snapped. She hurled the bouquet to the ground, the roses scattering across the marble, and stormed down the aisle. Her heels struck hard against the floor, echoing through the hall. The grand doors slammed behind her, the sound reverberating like a final gavel. No one followed. The allies she thought she had, the friends who flattered her, the elites who courted her, all slinked back into their chairs. A few shook their heads. Others whispered that they had seen this coming. Sierra Caldwell, once the bride of the hour, had become the outsider in an instant. Nia stood still, her hand tightening around her children's. Malik looked hollow, broken, but the truth around him was undeniable. Loretta, regal and firm, took her seat again, her message hanging in the air. The verdict had been given, not in a courtroom, but in the clapping hands of the city's most powerful people. The truth had won. The lies had collapsed. And Sierra Caldwell's empire of control crumbled as she disappeared through those doors. The ballroom was quieter now. The storm had passed, leaving only the weight of truth hanging in the air. Guests settled back into their seats, whispering less, watching more. Then Malik lowered himself to his knees. The room gasped softly at the sight. Billionaire Malik Sterling, the man who once seemed untouchable, bowed in front of his children. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me for the years I wasn't there. For the nights you cried, and I wasn't the one to hold you. For every birthday, every moment, every day I lost." His eyes brimmed with tears as he reached out his trembling hands. "If you can find it in your hearts, let me be your father now. Not in name, but in truth." For a moment, the children stood frozen, unsure. Then Jalen stepped forward. He placed his small hand in Malik's. Jordan followed, his grip firm. Finally, Jada let go of Nia's hand and wrapped her tiny arms around Malik's neck. "Daddy," she whispered. The word broke him. Malik pulled them close, his arms wrapping around all three, his head bowed as tears slid freely down his face. The guests who remained silent before now found themselves dabbing at their eyes, moved by the sight. Nia stood a step back, her face calm, her posture steady. She let the children have their moment. But when Malik looked up at her, hope flickering in his tearful eyes, she spoke with quiet firmness. "We rebuild slowly," she said. Her tone was gentle but resolute. "With proof in actions, not words. You don't erase years in a night, Malik. You earn back trust one day at a time." Malik nodded, swallowing hard. He didn't argue. For once, he accepted that words weren't enough. Behind them, Darius Freeman watched silently. He had been Nia's anchor in the storm, the mentor who helped her rebuild. When her gaze met his, he gave a slow nod, not just to her strength as a mother, but to the dignity with which she now stood. She had walked into the Sterling Hotel as the woman once dismissed, once discarded. She stood now as the mother of Malik's children, the builder of her own empire, the one who had carried truth through fire. The applause began again, softer this time, not wild or scandalized, respectful, a recognition not of wealth or power, but of resilience. And at the center of it all, Malik remained on his knees, holding the children who had given him back not just a legacy, but a chance at redemption. Morning light filtered gently through the curtains of a quiet home. The chaos of the wedding was behind them, replaced by the soft sounds of a new day. Jalen, Jordan, and Jada sat around a small wooden table in the living room. Crayons were scattered across sheets of paper, their little hands busy with drawings. On one page, they sketched a tall man, a woman, and 3 children holding hands. Above it, they scribbled a bright sun and a crooked heart, filling the paper with the simple joy only children can capture. Malik sat beside them. No tuxedo, no polished mask, just a father in a plain shirt, sleeves rolled. He leaned closer as Jordan held up the drawing proudly. "That's you," the boy said, pointing to the tall figure in the middle. Malik smiled faintly, his eyes damp. He picked up a crayon and added something of his own, himself kneeling, arms wrapped around the 3 smaller figures. The children laughed, their giggles spilling into the morning air, erasing the heaviness of the days before. Across the room, Nia watched quietly. Her arms rested at her sides, her posture steady. She didn't interrupt, didn't soften her boundaries, but she allowed the moment to unfold. Malik glanced at her, and she met his eyes with a small, calm nod, a promise of possibility, but only through action. Repair isn't a headline. It's a routine. It's the small moments, the quiet days, the steady work of showing up again and again. Families aren't healed by applause or scandal. They're healed by presence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Tales by Amani for more stories of truth, family, and resilience. Which moment hit you hardest? Tell us in the comments.